We're starting right on time. I know, right? A miracle in some circles. Good morning. I am Karan Blair, one of the co-directors of the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. The Alliance, yes. I should acknowledge my co-director, Jay Travis, who is in the back, and the other staff of the Alliance and our coordinating committee. The Alliance is an unprecedented union of parents, students, and educators, and organizations that represent and work with those communities. Together, we organize to represent the interests of 7 million or more people in this country. We are national, and we have coalitions in over 20 cities and states across the country. With the 1965 passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the federal government acknowledged that public schools in low-income communities need additional resources to deliver quality public education. In that law, Congress authorized an additional 40% in funding for each Title I eligible child. The report that we are releasing this morning, Confronting the Education Debt We Owe Billions to Black, Brown, and Low-Income Students and Their Schools, actually details that since 1965, the passage of that law, Congress has never fulfilled its own mandate. In fact, in a snapshot analysis, we found that between 2005 and 2017 alone, Congress underfunded Title I and IDEA by $580 billion. That ain't right. We determined this number by calculating the number of Title I and IDEA eligible students in the country and multiplied that by the 40% mandate. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Conference is the perfect place to launch this groundbreaking report. Because of many things, this is a racial justice issue. What we found is that millions of Black students in this country have been denied necessary and critical resources for their education. In addition to the underfunding of Title I and IDEA by $580 billion, the report also speaks to the fact that between those same years, 2005 and 2017, the wealth of the 400 richest people in this country grew by over $1 trillion. The conclusion then for us is that the under-resourcing of Title I and IDEA is not about the lack of funds or the lack of resources. It is fundamentally a matter of choices and priorities. And Black and brown kids in this country are not a priority for this Congress. Gathered today are parent leaders who have been organizing for decades, knowing that their schools have not been given the resources that they need. We're standing with the leaders of the largest labor unions in this country. We are standing with academics and leaders in philanthropy to validate the methodology of this report. We are standing with teacher organizers, and together we are highlighting the underfunding, but we are also saying it is time for something new. We are demanding deeper and more profound investment in our public schools. We are standing together with the 7 million people that we represent, and we are demanding the full funding of Title I and IDEA. We want our $580 billion. We're also saying, as people in community who've been organizing for decades, that we know what works. And so we are demanding an investment in 25,000 sustainable community schools around this country. And just in case you wonder, what is a sustainable community school? Think LeBron James. All of us saw that school and said, every child in this country deserves that kind of quality education. And then we're also saying the way forward is to make sure that corporations and those who are wealthiest pay their fair share. Let us begin. We will hear now from Attorney Judith Brown Dianis, Executive Director of the Advancement Project, the national office.
Thank you. Thank you, Karan, and I want to thank Eros for this report that is very important. $580 billion. We need to close the debt, but we need interest. We can't just take $580 billion and not recognize that we need interest on that payment, because rich folks understand interest. They also understand, and many of us understand, when you get a check that is marked insufficient funds, as Dr. King said. We don't want insufficient funds. We want to close the gap. This gap has lingered for too long. It has accumulated over time. Too many black and brown children go to schools that are crumbling, with teachers who are underpaid, who have to bring their own supplies to school using their payment that they get that is too low to pay for the actual supplies. Too many young people go to schools where there's a technology gap. Too many young people go to schools that are set for prison. At the Advancement Project, we do work around the school-to-prison pipeline and have been doing it for 20 years. And I can tell you that our priorities are wrong. We have a debt, but then when we get the money, we are using it on the wrong thing. Too many children are going to schools where cops are trolling the hallways. The same cops that we don't trust in our communities are being brought in to deal with our children every day. And too many of our schools see these cops, who we do not trust, coming into the schools and criminalizing our children. Just like our communities, we're being over-policed and over-criminalized. In Miami, for example, where they spend over $20 million in a year for police and security technology, they only have 450 guidance counselors. They have over 1,000 police and security officers. Our priorities are messed up. And so what we are saying to not only Congress, but to the states and local governments, from Advancement Project and our partner Alliance for Educational Justice, we are calling for police-free schools. Instead of spending money to criminalize black and brown bodies starting at the age of 5, let us reinvest in our children. Give them guidance counselors and social workers and training for teachers that they need to understand our children. Because it's not all about the children who are being bad. Instead, it's adults who may not understand the children and who overreact to our children. And so for police-free schools, if we take that money and reinvest in books, in buildings, in technology, in the supports that our young people need, we will see different outcomes. So close the debt and change the priorities so that our children can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. We'll hear now from Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers.
So I'm really glad that the person who I think is the leader of education in the Congress, Representative Bobby Scott, is here with us today, because Representative Scott has been making this case over and over and over again. And every time there are more cuts to education, Representative Scott, who is the minority chair of the Education Committee, goes to the well of the Congress to say we need to be spending more on education, not less on education. I just want to acknowledge him, because 6 decades after Brown and 5 decades after President Johnson signed the original ESEA, we are going in the wrong direction. And as Kieran said, these are absolute choices that the powers that be made. So I am glad that AROS has actually done the math to figure out what should have been the real fulfillment of the promise of Title I, of the promise of IDEA, that it's a long past time to have the rhetoric of these important policies without the reality of funding these policies. And ultimately, now, because of the strikes or walkouts in West Virginia and Arizona and Oklahoma and Colorado and Kentucky and North Carolina, who, let me just say, by the way, used the strategies and tactics of the AROS locals to ensure that those strikes were effective, all of a sudden, the world now knows what parents and community advocates and teachers have known for a long time, which is we will turn around every rock. We will do everything we can to ensure that kids get a decent education. But why is it in the United States of America that we rely on parents and teachers to do everything that government should be doing to $580 billion worth of funding? Now, what does this funding go for? And Judith talked a little bit about it, but I just want to paint this picture. When we say 25,000 community schools, that means ensuring that every time a child comes to school, that child has mental health services, that child has a guidance counselor, that child has a good meal, that child is set up to succeed like the richest in America. That's what we mean when we say 25,000 community schools. That's what this could pay for. And the last thing I'll say is this. If we could spend $1 trillion on a tax cut for the rich, for those who already are well endowed, for those who are already the wealthiest that this country has had, we have the largest gap between rich and poor in 2016 that we have had in 100 years. Why can't we spend that money, divert it, rescind the tax cut, and spend it on kids with special needs? Spend it in kids in poor communities throughout the country. Spend it in a way that we actually strengthen America and strengthen America's education. That's why this report is so important, and that's why this report must be the standard by which we judge everyone who is running for office in November 2018.
Thank you. And yes, a part of our work is to say that we want education and the closing of the debt and the funding of our school to be a part of the conversation that we're having this November. Speaking of elections, speaking of congressional leadership, I want to stand with Randy in acknowledging the leadership of Congressman Bobby Scott for what he has done, what he continues to do, and the leadership he provides on education matters. And so coming to the podium now is Congressman Bobby Scott, ranking member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce.
Thank you, Karan, and I want to start by thanking the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools for your hard work with this report. It's a pleasure and honor to join all of the advocates as we talk about school equity. In education, we talk about the achievement gap that separates people by race, geography, income, but this report identifies another gap in our demand, which we ought to be demanding to be closed, and that is the funding gap. We are this is a massive gap on what we should be spending on our students and what they actually need. Now, Corinne pointed out this as a racial issue, and we know that the federal government formally recognized this gap in Brown v. Board of Education when it said that it is unlikely that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. And we know that wasn't happening because we fund education basically with the real estate tax, which virtually guarantees inequality because the wealthy areas will always have more resources than low-income areas. And so in 1965, we passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, to try to do something about it. And Title I put money into low-income areas so that we could achieve some kind of equity. But when we see public schools in some areas closed because they don't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer, or when we see teachers go on strike because they're denied a living wage, or when we see families desperately turning to low-performing charter schools, we see evidence of chronic neglect and misguided priorities. Now, we can afford to address these priorities. It's already been pointed out that in the last Congress, we passed a tax cut that overwhelmingly benefits the top 1% in corporations, costing nearly $2 trillion. So there's no question that we can afford to adequately fund our public schools. The question is whether we will prioritize students over special interests. And we've heard for specific solutions. I just want to talk about one solution that we ought to be funding, and that is the Rebuild America School Act, which is a $100 billion investment in physical and digital infrastructure of our public schools so that they can provide a quality education. $100 billion, that's about 5% of what the tax cuts cost. We can improve school conditions, enhance student outcomes, and create nearly 1.9 million jobs. That's about 5 times more than the $2 trillion tax cut will provide. Despite having over 100 co-sponsors, the proposal has been totally ignored by the Republican leadership in Congress. And so this report is a reminder of the urgent need to better align our budget with our values. And so I want to thank the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools for producing this important work and look forward to implementing the recommendations in this report in the next Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and we look forward to working with you to make that happen. We will hear now from Dr. John Jackson, president of the Schott Foundation on Public Education.
I also want to thank the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools for this report. As a member of the philanthropic community, we know that investments matter. What we invest in, what you pay for, is often what you get. So quantitatively, $500 billion debt is quantitatively a challenge. This report is also correct historically. Our communities presented an invoice to the federal government in 1954 in Brown versus the Board of Education, and it was not paid. In 1965, through ESEA, we were given a promissory note that was still unpaid. In 1973, we presented another invoice in San Antonio versus Rodriguez, and the federal government said that's not our invoice to pay. So our communities never got the resources that they needed. And because of that, each state has an education debt that is behind. In New York, you call it the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. In North Carolina, you call it the Leandro case. In New Jersey, you call it the Abbott case. But there's a debt that is still owed our young people across the nation. And after underfunding our schools, then they came with the narrative of our public school system is failing. Our public school system is failing. Even without the resources in Georgia, our public school system still created Dr. Martin Luther King, a graduate of Booker T. Washington High School. Even, we don't have to go that far back. Our public school system created Keisha Lance Bottoms, the current mayor of Atlanta, Frederick Douglass High School. Our public school system created Stacey Abrams, the Democratic nominee for governor in Georgia, Avondale High School. Even after underfunding our public schools in California, That public school system created LaToya Cantrell, the mayor of New Orleans. Even after underfunding the public school system in Florida, our public school system created Andrew Gillum, the first African-American Democratic nominee for governor in the state of Florida. So we can't say that our public school system is failing. What has happened is we failed our public school system. And that's what this report says. And quite frankly, I'll go out on a limb. How many people here graduated from a public school? So unless we're a group of self-professed failures, there's something that our public school system is doing right. But this report says that there's a debt that is still paid, that is still owed, that must be paid. And my grandmother used to tell me, if you go to a river and you see a fish laughing and a duck barking, don't ask what's wrong with the fish or the duck, ask what's wrong with the river. And our rivers need resources. So elections matter. And what this report should tell us, confronting the debt, we've got to confront it in November. So when the candidates come to you and they talk about building lakes next to houses in wealthy neighborhoods, our response has to be, let me take you to the river. Take them to the water. Take them and show them where the opportunities exist that we are not investing in. Are we going to build lakes around wealthy homes, or are we going to build rivers of opportunity? And that's how we have to frame the question as we look into November. And every elected official that is looking for our vote has to come by the water. We've got to take them by the water, and they have to show us the rivers of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. I almost went to church. Take them to the river. Come on in here. We'll hear now from, speaking of elections and the impact on communities, we'll hear from Jonathan Stith, National Director of the Alliance for Educational Justice, speaking to how this is an issue for parents and students.
Is that good? All right. Good morning. Excited to be, or good afternoon. Woo, it's been one morning. We're excited to be here again. My name is Jonathan Stith, the National Director for the Alliance for Educational Justice. We are a national network of 30 groups, and we represent the 1.6 million students who go to school with law enforcement but no counselor. We are those whom Brown versus Board has failed. As the report points out, this country has had a misplaced and even hostile priority of, instead of educating Black and brown and low-income students, controlling them and policing them, and controlling them through policing and punitive discipline. We notice at the school-to-prison pipeline. This has been coupled with our lack of power as Black parents in our cities that have been stripped from us by mayoral takeover, state takeover, along with the chronic underfunding, has created austerity-like conditions where Black and brown parents have little choice but to abandon public school systems for the sake of not wanting to sacrifice our children. But in fact, and we are right because we know it has had deadly consequences, as the report points out or tells the story of LaPortia Massey, a 12-year-old middle school student from Philadelphia, a Black girl who died from an asthma attack because there was no nurse in the school. Because the city of Philadelphia in 2012, in addition to deciding to close schools massively, decided the next year that it would double down on police and cut out counselors and teachers. So there was no nurse on site. And then there was another student that died that same year. And so we are clear that what happens in Philadelphia, it happens in Dallas, is happening in all of our cities, where our cities spend more on cops than they do on counselors. And we are also at a precipice moment as this country debates what school safety is. And we've seen the DeVos administration completely ignore the voices of young people, as thousands of young people in Philadelphia poured into the streets saying that their solution to safety doesn't involve more guns and it doesn't involve more cops. And so we're calling on, and also at a moment where now we understand the administration is going to allow states to use monies from ESSA to buy guns and arm teachers and add more police to our schools. And so we call on Congress to reject that misplaced priority. And to really fully fund Title I. We also want 25,000 sustainable community schools. We want 25,000 diets where our students are seen as green technologists and those who are going to solve the global crisis. We want schools that have mood detectors instead of metal detectors. We also are calling for the Department of for a Department of Education justice. And that Department of Education has a responsibility to ensure the equity of education at the local and state level. And so if Julian Bond was right so many years ago that saying that promising a black child 12 years of education and only delivering 6 is violence, then this report points to a war on young people. A war that we must confront by fighting and beginning to organize. And so we're excited to be a part of Arrows and to join this crusade to really confront the debt and bring equity and justice to our schools and our communities.
This is, in fact, a crusade to confront the debt. Thank you, Jonathan. We will hear now from a friend of Arrows, Lily Escacin Garcia, president of the National Education Association.
Y muy buenas tardes, amigos, los luchadores de la justicia. Qué honor estar con ustedes. What an honor it is to be here with fearless fighters for social justice. And I'm going to take there's one problem I find with this. We need to take our calculators back out because we're only dating back to 1965. We need to date back to 1776. We need to date back to when the founders of this country made a promise. When they said, all of us. All right, they said men, and they meant men. So we need to fix that. I'm a teacher. I don't mind correcting people's mistakes. So all of us are created equal. That's the most powerful word. Equal. But really the most powerful word in that sentence is all, not some, not these guys and those guys. If you want to see inequality, by the way, I would also correct that I don't want to send people to our most challenged schools. I don't want to send them to where the buildings are falling down. I want to send them through the McMansions. I want them to see what the best public schools, the most privileged, advantaged, we have the most amazing public schools on the planet, bar none, public or private. You just got to live in the right neighborhood to be able to have a ticket to go to that school because of the institutional racism, the structure that decides who's going to get and who's not going to get. I have walked in to some of the most beautiful schools in the world. And I will tell you right now, I would not take one thing away from them. Their parents said, I want AP chemistry, I want French classes, I want intramural sports, I want girls volleyball, and I want an orchestra, and I want field trips, and I want a school nurse, and counselors who have time to counsel. And I want social emotional training, development for those educators. I want all the support staff. I want everything because my kids will need that to succeed in their lives. And those parents are right. Their kids need that. All kids need that. And I don't think we have to, it's not rocket science. Go into that school with a piece of paper and a pencil. Start taking an inventory. What you got? What are the resources? What did you buy with those resources? You didn't buy metal detectors. You bought school computers. You didn't buy some expensive test prep. You bought poetry and AP English. You bought programs and resources and services and staff for those children. All children deserve that. That should be our standard. I said that to a reporter. Hi, reporters. I said that to a reporter, and I said, our goal at the NEA, and I know the AFT is the same thing, I know AROS is the same thing. We want every public school to look like our best public schools, every single one of them. And this very sweet person said, well, that's a nice dream, but you know we can't afford that. We did afford it, didn't we? We afforded it for children who looked like this, for white, affluent children. And we, by design, said we cannot afford it for black and brown children. You call out race when you see race. And this is racial injustice. So let me leave you with this. In the words of Donald Trump. Yeah, it hurts. He said, I like uneducated people. You remember him saying that? He said, I didn't make that up, did I? I didn't dream that. I like uneducated people. You know, for every dictator, for every authoritarian, brutal regime in the history of history, they suppressed three things. They suppressed democracy. You made sure certain people couldn't vote, had no voice, had no power. They suppressed labor unions. You want workers who are obedient and frightened and happy for any little crumb you throw at them. And they suppressed education. You have this track for the people that are going to be your rulers. You have this track for everyone else. This country has never lived up to its promise of all, but we've always known what we were supposed to be. And the luchadores, the fighters in this room and in this country, are going to keep fighting for what this country is supposed to be and the promise that it made to all our children. Mil gracias, hermanos y hermanas.
Yes, we will keep fighting. We'll hear now from Zakia Ansari, a leader with the Journey for Justice Alliance and the We Choose campaign.
Y'all already looking at me. People who know me already know I'm already full. So I'm going to try to hold it together and keep it together. Because when I hear 1965, because to be honest, my soul as a mother of 8 and a grandmother of 3 can't take 1776. But if I hear 1965, that's 50 years of black and brown children that look like me, that were me actually, right? Not having access, being denied access. My soul, my heart, can't take anymore. If you can feel my heart, it's like beating out of my chest. As was shared, I'm the Advocacy Director for the Alliance for Quality Education, and I'm standing here as a proud member of the Journey for Justice Alliance. The question for me is always, who will be bold and courageous for our children? For the black, brown, and poor children in this country? When will we have zero tolerance for inequity? When will we have zero tolerance for the violations of human and civil rights that are upon our children? Journey for Justice in 2004, Death by 1,000 Cuts, which highlighted the impact of school closures and school privatization. In May, Journey for Justice, Failing Brown v. Board, another report. Just yesterday, which highlighted, the cost inequities within cost offerings in black and brown schools and white schools. Just yesterday, most recently, in New York City, we just got a report. Our independent budget office just acknowledged that we will be getting less Title I fundings for the children in our community. And at the same time yesterday, the Alliance for Quality Education, which is my organization, just released a report called Educational Racism, right? What we define educational racism is when we identify that New York State has chronically underfunding of our schools, and the unwillingness to recognize and rectify the impact that this practice has resulted in disparate outcomes for students. New York State ranks 49th. And now we have confronting the education debt. Now, I don't know about you, but I've about read enough. How many reports do we have to put out? How many stories do we have to tell? How many parents and young people we have to bring up to share the stories and the danger and the trauma that they experience year after year? Clearly, the answer is at least 50 years. We will never receive equality, much less equity, if what we experience right now, what we know is that our children are not valued. Because all of that is steeped in what you value. That's why Journey for Justice, Arrows, and We Choose are building a multiracial coalition in communities across the country that is building power. We understand what it's going to take to move this and finally get change. Where we are calling out the school choice movement as a scam. Yes, we said it, as a scam. We choose equitable education. So guess what? The We Choose Alliance is doing this. We are organizing midterm town halls. Yes, we are organizing. Guess where we're organizing? In Chicago, in Oakland, Los Angeles, in San Francisco, California, in New Orleans, of course in Detroit, Michigan, in Newark, Patterson, and Camden, New Jersey, Cincinnati, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Dallas, Texas. You know why? Because once again, we don't want to sit here and allow another 50 years to go by. As was shared, I have 3 grandchildren. I'll be darned if I'm going to sit here and allow this country, our states, our cities, our elected officials to continue to allow this inequity to happen. I don't know about you, but I know for a fact that our children are valued. They are valuable to us, and they should be valuable to society. And we will not stand and continue to allow state, government, or federally for them to treat our children and traumatize our children more by inequitably funding our schools. Thank you.
That needs a moment. That needs a moment. Thank you, Zakiya. Thank you. We'll hear now from Heather Conroy, Executive Vice President of the Service Employees International Union.
Thank you. I'm really proud to be here with you all today. Back to school means back to work for thousands of SEIU members across the country who educate students enrolled in pre-K through high school. SEIU members are also the parents of these folks, the kids that are going to school. Millions of our members were the teary-eyed folks who are sending their kids off to school over the last few weeks. And we know, because it's our schools, that our schools are not funded the way they need to be. It is very clear to us that every student is not given the resources that they need to succeed. And in most cases, those schools are schools that serve students that are Black and brown. Arrows has documented in confronting education debt the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been stolen from Black, brown, and low-income students through the federal government's persistent failure to fully fund programs for low-income students and programs for students with special needs. In the Los Angeles Unified School District, where tens of thousands of SEIU members are employed and where even more SEIU members send their kids, it has one of the largest populations of special needs students in the country. 72,000 special needs students are in the LAUSD school district, and 85% of those students are Latino or Black. Yet, we know these students are not receiving the resources they need to succeed. Without the funding to operate the program at a proper level, the school districts are consistently cutting special education assistants who provide academic support, behavioral support, personal health and hygiene support, and it's compromising those students' ability to learn and their safety. This is completely unacceptable. And so we owe a huge debt to Black and brown communities. That's what this report's all about, and that's what we've been hearing from all of our speakers. After generations of disinvestment, we cannot allow this to continue. We have to make a down payment on this debt starting this November by making sure that we elect leaders who are committed to making sure that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share and then put that fair share into the priorities that our communities need. And so that's why we are proud to stand with AROS in calling out this report, calling out this debt, and saying it is time to end it and time to begin to pay back the debt that we all owe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. I should also say that for more information and to see the full report, visit educationdebt.reclaimOurSchools.org. We're going to go as quickly as we can because we're over time, but we'll hear now from Jose Munoz, Director of the Coalition for Community Schools.
I just want to start with Father, thank you for this awesome opportunity we have. You say the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I want to thank you for the workers that you have given us today and those out in the neighborhoods that we are serviced today. My name is Jose Munoz. I have the great honor and privilege of being the director for the Coalition for Community Schools. I started off my school year this year in a school in Washington, D.C. We're listening to some 8th graders. And the question was asked of them, what do you want people to know about your school? And a young man answered, he goes, being in the Southeast, you wouldn't know, but Kramer is a good school. His words were piercing. Why would this young man feel the need to defend his school and his community? I tell you, it's a message that's being delivered to our young people as far as their schools not being good schools. We're telling this lie to our people. We're telling this lie to our communities. We're telling this lie to our educators. What is this lie of not being a good school telling them? It's telling our teachers that they're not trying hard enough. It's telling our parents that they don't care enough. It's telling our students that they're not good enough. It's telling our communities that they're not worth the investment. It's a bad school is a lie we tell our children and families that you need to choose somewhere else to go. It's a bad school is telling our communities just to prepare us for the disinvestment of our public schools. Every child should have the opportunity to pursue and achieve their dreams and contribute to the well-being of our society. Every neighborhood deserves a public school, and every community, a community school system that delivers upon the promise of that achievement. A public school should be the very center of creating a flourishing community where everybody belongs and works together and thrives. We're at a pivotal point in our country, as you all know and you see it every day, where the growth of division is evident in the growth of the gaps between our white, black, and brown children. There is no greater time than right now that we need a unifying strategy. And we believe that unifying strategy is community schools. Community schools serve as the hubs of the community that actually unite families, educators, and neighbors. It is their collaborative leadership that provides the relational glue necessary for the success of our young people. Community schools are a vital component of an equity strategy, creating the conditions of the most vulnerable students to feel safe, stable, and supported in their learning by investing in communities that have been marginally uninvested in historically by the disinvestment. Community schools are like the shepherd who leaves the 99 in search of the one. So we're asking all of you to join us in our quest and our urgency of creating 25,000 community schools by 2025. But make no mistake, this is not about a goal. This is about what we become as a nation in the process. We become a nation that shows our children they're worthy by promoting harmony among us adults, investing our human and financial resources that are commiserate of our awesome responsibility of supporting healthy development of our future generations. A nation shows our children that they are worthy of realizing a quality education is the cornerstone of our democracy, and we show our children that they are worthy by pursuing equity, working together to break the back of the systemic racial and socioeconomic barriers that they face historically that plagued our most vulnerable children. We could be able to show our children that they are loved. And we know that that love always protects always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Thank you.
Thank you. I will hear now from Dr. Denisha Jones of the Badass Teachers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm a Director of Teacher Education here at Trinity Washington University, but I'm representing the Badass Teachers Association. And we are a grassroots activist organization of teachers who are fed up with a lot of what's in that report, and I'm proud to speak with us today. But I have a minute, so I'm going to jump through these remarks, and there are two concepts that I think we need to discuss as we talk about confronting the debt. And one is the idea of meritocracy and schools being the great equalizer, and the other is the idea that education today has become a zero-sum game. To think about meritocracy, to have a true meritocratic society, we need a system that gives everyone an equal chance, and that has always supposed to have been public education. This report shows us that that is not true. Public education is not the great equalizer for many low-income and black and brown children in this country. This is evidenced when we intentionally, systematically underfund their public school education, when we invest in corrections and prisons instead of teachers and counselors, and then we have the lack of will to ensure that students with disabilities have equal access to education. None of this is a mistake. In this country, some children matter and others do not. And as a result, we have become a zero-sum game in public education. That means that somebody wins, somebody loses. So as we confront the debt, we need to think about the advantages that are going to other people, because you can't have a debt without another side being advantaged. So when you take money from Title I and you spend it on wealthier school districts, you're advantaging them at the disadvantage of another student. And that makes education a zero-sum game. But public education does not have to be a winner-take-all scenario. We can have a fully funded, robust public education that serves all children well. We can make public education the great equalizer, and we can move towards a more meritocratic society. But first, we must acknowledge and recognize what has been done, and we must commit to embarking on sweeping changes that level the playing field by erasing down the debt. We can do all of this, but first we need to have the will to make a difference. The Badass Teachers Association is committed to fighting with allies like AROS and Journey for Justice and many more to not only confront the educational debt, but to wipe it out and realize the promise of high-quality public education for all. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Brother Hashim Jabbar, Interim Executive Director for the Dignity in Schools campaign.
I'm the closer, so we're going to close this thing up very quickly, but I want to do it right. On behalf of Racial Justice Now and the Dignity in Schools campaign, we thank AROS for this report that is all truth. And based on truth, I have to bring the hip-hop community to the forefront. As a young boy growing up in this city in Washington, D.C., we had a saying in the hip-hop community, said, keep it real. But because old people, state officials, elected officials, parents, and others tried to hijack it, they had to switch it up and do something different. They said, keep it all the way 100. So we want to thank AROS today for keeping it all the way 100 in this report. But if we tell the whole truth, we must recognize and realize that we are a unique place in American history today with this current administration. If we want to keep it all the way 100, let's remember that black people were not allowed to read by law in this country. Let's keep it all the way 100 and say that we built that Capitol that's standing over here. Let's keep it all the way 100 and say that we built that White House and we have not got our check as of yet. So let's keep it all the way 100. We weren't allowed to read, but guess what? That movie I want to lift up, Taraji P. Henson, Hidden Figures. A public school graduate from this area in Hidden Figures, a black scientist, helped this country keep up with Russia. Are we having problems with Russia today? Helped us keep up with the global affairs that are going on today. Black women, scientists, mathematicians. But if we keep it 100, we're not producing engineers in America. We're not producing computer scientists in America like we used to. We're not producing the scientists necessary to keep up in a global world. But if we want to keep up and we want to keep it 100, we have to serve black and brown students the debt that is owed to them. Thank you.
Thank you all. I am joined by Jen Epps Edison from the Center for Popular Democracy, and we are closing out. Yes, as soon as we get done, we have to clear out because we're over time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our partners. $580 billion owed to black and brown kids and students with disabilities in this country. We are confronting the debt. We're making demands for full funding, for sustainable community schools, and for the rich to pay their fair share. And we're making education matter in the upcoming midterms. And if you want more information, educationdebt.reclaimourschools.org. Jen Epps.
So look, last week I was arrested for shouting at the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. My bruises are now healing. And, you know, a lot of people shouted for a lot of reasons, but I was thinking about Brown v. Board. I was thinking about my special needs son. I was thinking about who would be on the court if I ever had to sue his school district for his services. So I just want to say that this is a moment when the status quo has got to end. We are not going to lobby our way out of this problem. It is only in our resistance, only in our fight, only in our chanting, only in our demanding will we ever get what we deserve. So I just want to say, they say build that wall. We should be saying pay your debt.
Pay your debt.
Pay your debt. Pay your debt. Pay your debt.